All right, great. Are we ready? Vinod, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. While you do that, I'll just do a. Yeah. While you do that, I'll just do a quick introduction. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. It's like I said, these sessions are very is a place for us to meet some of you and to kind of have these conversations on a monthly basis to see what's on top of your mind and to also introduce you to other experts in the field. Now, Tech4Dev, when I was chatting with Lobo, he just said that he's actually has spoken to at least a third of the organizations who signed up for it. And we've been in conversation with Tech4Dev and Don Lobo for a while, but what really struck us and what we go back to his team is really that they're one of the organizations who talk about technology from the perspective of what it means for the social sector. They're one of those who talk about maturity of technology being applied. What does open source really mean? What's the total cost of ownership, the organizational capacity? So kind of go into the depth of the organization, understand the pulse of the organization before kind of giving this whole speech about technology is the solution to all our problems. They kind of go deeper than just that. And that's what kind of kept us in conversations. And now, which also one of the outcomes of it is this session. So we're very glad to have to be hosting this for our grantee partners. And we're glad to have several folks from the team. I know Don Lobo is here. We have Piali and we have Vinod. From what I understand, Vinod is the key facilitator today. Vinod works as a fractional CXO at Project Tech4Dev to deliver impact to NGOs using technology as an enabler and force multiplier. Vinod is passionate about leveraging the power of data for impactful storytelling and increasing program efficiencies. So he's also his work on the development data platform is directed towards helping nonprofits derive actionable insights from their data with an easy-to-use platform for streamlining organizational data. We know a lot of our partners who have worked with Donald Lobo and his team, maybe with Vinod as well. So we hope that today's conversation kind of gives you an insight to what they have to offer. And we hope you could kind of continue this conversation with your team post the session. Over to you and your team. Over to you, Vinod.
Thanks, Ahana. So I'll just give a really brief intro and setup and just a couple of things which I think are really important, at least from my perspective, before I hand it over to Vinod to run the call. But basically, from our perspective, some of our key principles are we don't think technology is the solution to everything, right? So that's why we like to talk to NGOs. We like to understand their problem before we recommend something. So in general, we go beyond just the cursory 1 hour call and then recommend a solution. We like to investigate a bit deeper. So one is technology is not the solution. And the second thing that we do is anything and everything we do is open source and for the larger public. So we do believe that talking to your friends, your peers, and learning more about the ecosystem is super important so that you can make the wise choice, make a good and right choice. Primarily, we like to borrow, beg, and steal from other organizations so that we can service the sector. And finally, feel free to reach out to us at any point in time. We are more than happy to jump on calls with people, offer you what we think is our advice. We've got our biases with regard to open source, but we think that we offer folks as unbiased and advice as possible. So I'll hand it off to Vinod to kind of start off the session. Vinod?
Thanks, Lobo. We'll start off the session now. And this kind of just to give a brief idea of what the session is going to look like. We'll start off talking a little bit about Tech4Dev, what we do, all the different things that we do. Will be pretty brief. And then we have a few agenda points, which are what we see as most of the things that we have been advising a lot of NGOs on. And I'm going to bring up those topics in an agenda. We want this to be a very open discussion style. I'd be okay if we don't finish the whole webinar. It's totally fine. It's meant to be a totally informal kind of discussion where we can go. And when we get to the point where it's starting to get too much into the details, we'll kind of break off, and you can always contact us. As Lobo said, feel free to contact us. We are totally willing to take up your calls and then process towards that later. But the idea today is to kind of look towards the NGO as all the NGOs working together as a community to kind of also see our commonality of our problems And what we have also seen in terms of some of the pitfalls, some things which could be helpful, some advice that we have given to NGOs, some things that we have seen, some things that we have done badly, and learnings from those. And so we'll kind of go from there. So I'll start off with a little bit about Tech4Dev and where we kind of come in and where we fit in. So essentially for us, the primary things that matter is that we are looking at what is the problem with a lot of the technology issues or challenges that comes up for people in the nonprofit sector. Some of the big things that I've just listed here, just like strategies, solutions, data, and people. It's just four big things, four big buckets, right? So I'll start with one of them, strategy. This is something that we find significant with a lot of NGOs, where organization and program strategy and what you want to do with programs may exist in a reasonable form or may not exist also. So somewhere it's always in the middle, whether it's refined, whether it's in the middle, or whether it's still getting sorted out. But the bigger aspect of it is technology is not really a core part. A lot of technology design is ad hoc, gets done very quickly, gets pushed to vendors, comes back, we work with it for 6 months, a year, and there are problems, then we try to fix them, more band-aids, and then we keep trying to do that. I'll go a little bit more into detail also in terms of that. Again, continuing on with the same line, some of the solutions that we try to build, they are super expensive to build a lot of times. We end up doing costly builds, and this is one of our prime principles, as Lobo said, is take as much as you can from what's already available. Don't build anything till you absolutely need to, whether it's open source or whether it's even closed source. If you can pay a little bit more money and get a closed source solution that somebody sells as a SaaS platform, you're probably better off doing that than to start doing a custom solution. Data, this is a big thing where we're all having programs that are leading towards evidence-based interventions. And so we have seen the whole gamut of data collection where you have organizations which collect very little data that doesn't help them inform their programs. And then to the other side where we collect a lot of data about the people that we help. And then it becomes a question of, are we doing the right things in terms of data privacy and data security? And then the big elephant in the room, which we again also face. I don't think I'll have any magic bullets in today's webinar on this, on people. Technology people are super hard to find, super difficult to retain, and definitely expensive. Even from my personal experience, we have tried to hire at Tech4Dev, we've tried to hire at the organization that I work as a fractional CXO. It's not smooth sailing, takes significant amount of time, significant resources, and even then we still have to figure out there are probably compromises to make in terms of the skill sets you can get, what at the budgets that you would be willing to pay. So going back a little bit more into detail to what Tech4Dev does, as it states out here, we are a community-centric collaborative approach towards dealing with how do we help nonprofits with their technology needs. And in that perspective, we do 4 different things. And I'll come to the first one, which is the community of practice, as the last one. The first program, what we do is the technology stack, where not only are we also advising people to use open source platforms, we do build also on our end. So to give an idea of the platforms that we are intimately involved with and build, one is Cliffic, which is a conversation platform on WhatsApp. We are currently developing what we call as a development data platform to make it easier to get insights out of your data. And then we've been long involved with a field data collection platform called Avni. So in that regard, we kind of also we take up the honors of building the platforms and not just only saying that use open source platforms. So one of the other things that we want to be able to do is where we see niches that are really targeted towards the social sector, we want to be able to also, if there are nobody else servicing those needs, we want to be able to jump in and address those needs by developing open source platforms. The second element of it is the fractional CXO port. The fractional CXO is a new program. I actually started out as a fractional CXO working for Tech4Dev loosely last June and then officially last September. The idea of it is you have people who have worked in the technology sector for a long time, who are now working in the social sector, and they're able to provide guidance on technology strategy for organizations, building roadmaps, and providing very high-level guidance for how the organization should approach technology and anything associated with that. Again, in this, our range of what we do as a fractional CXO can vary a bit. In certain cases, it could be providing just high-level strategy. In certain cases, it could be more in-depth on particular projects, providing technical project guidance, project architecture, and things like that. And also, lately, we have also been starting to do on more help for nonprofits on back office IT towards HRMS systems, towards CRM systems, any of those needs, which are essentially what you would consider as what the NGOs need to run their organization and not towards the program end. The third one, the data and learning part, and this is where there is a kind of a mix between what we have been doing with the development of the data platform and trying to instill data culture, bring data awareness, make NGOs start thinking about data security and privacy. Because a lot of times we do collect data that is quite private, but we don't think through how we are exposing that data to everybody involved in the organization and outside. So all of these combined together don't make up Tech4Dev. One of the biggest things that we think of ourselves is that we are wanting to create that ecosystem where we are not alone by ourselves. We want to be able to create that ecosystem where we, with the NGOs, with all our software partners, are able to enable a community of practice that all of us feel good to be able to communicate with each other well, so that we can basically jointly develop solutions for our needs. I'm going to just skip through this slide mostly, kind of what I was talking about on Glyphic, the open data platform, and Avni, and then the fractional CXO part. We'll talk now a little bit more about session topics and what we want to address. Again, feel free to stop me at any point during the presentation, and we'll have a lot of time also for questions, and we can take that up even at the end or during the slides. Both of it is okay. So from perspective session topics, what we wanted to talk a little bit about is a few things that have come up quite often in our conversations with NGOs, and that's where we want to basically focus this webinar on. And starting out with addressing some technology misconceptions, which may or may not be super applicable to a lot of people on this group. A little bit of thinking about program and organization strategy, because I know this is supposed to be a technology webinar, but we are totally of the opinion that your technology strategy is should follow what you do on program and organization. If you are unclear on the first two, technology strategies, like it's just not going to be very useful, and probably you are setting yourself up for failure from that perspective. We'll go over a little bit on some considerations for reusing, buying versus building. As I mentioned, I probably mentioned this a few more times. Almost never buy, and I'd say almost. Would probably recommend for 95% of the case, try not to build stuff. And buy always, whether it be an open source solution or if it's a SaaS solution, that's probably way better than building it on your own. And we'll go over a little bit of the considerations of when you might want to build, also a lot of different platforms that are available to use, whether they be open source or SaaS platforms. We'll go a little bit over some of the community groups that are available, that are existing resources that are available, WhatsApp groups, forums. And I would also probably say that using of peer networks is probably also a big thing. It's very easy for people to just say, oh, I've got this, I know what I'm doing, but it doesn't take a whole lot. It takes probably an hour or two to ping a few people and get 3 or 4 informed opinions. And again, we are also there. Feel free to contact us, and we would totally love to give you our opinion, biased or unbiased. We'll do the best we can, but we're totally open to advising in that regard. One of the topics that comes up in a lot of our endeavors, especially on the fractional CXO end, is how to manage vendors. And this is one of the things that we kind of are learning as we go. And the biggest thing that I would probably say, and especially from my own perspective as a fractional CXO, is that vendor management is absolutely a two-way street. A lot of times we think of it as like, oh, we gave all of this stuff to the vendors and they botched it up. You go ask the vendors and they'll be like, oh, these things kept changing. We never figured out what we had to do. So there's a lot of different things, and I go over a little of the things that we have learned as we have dealt with more and more vendors ourselves. We'll finish up a little bit with data, a couple of slides about data, thinking of security and privacy. And one of the big things we'll finish off, we left it at the end, but it's really primal, is to think about user as being the center for what you are developing and drive all your technology development towards the user. So I'll take a little break and have actually people look at the chat, and feel free to post. If you look at the top link in the chat, you should see a poll survey, which you should be able to click on. And you should be able to put together a couple of your biggest challenges. And we'll take a look just to kind of give us a feel for how we as an audience are doing. I'll give it a minute or two more, and then we can take a look at it. That's great. See a lot of responses on, especially on adoption, complexity of tech, security and affordability. We got a few which are talking about the same thing in terms of difficulty and ease of use, user friendliness. Is some on how do we choose between options. Noble, Erica, feel free to pipe in if I'm missing anything that you think is important enough that I'm not seeing through. See, definitely on talent and hiring and retaining talent. Okay. So I'll stop here, and maybe we can take a couple of 2 or 3 questions or feedback if people want to talk about something particular. It's a good point to kind of break off and to get input on. I'll just talk about a couple of the topics, and if people have some input, maybe pipe up. One would be on adoption choice of technologies, adoption, and difficulty of use. If you have some thoughts, I think a couple of you have put those as your thoughts. Would be nice to hear, very short, 30 seconds to a minute, if you want to talk through them. Go ahead, Girija. I think you have your hand raised.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So for Drishti is a social organization which has been around for 25 years. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary a few weeks ago. And so like you mentioned, right, there are a lot of these applications, some of them mobile apps and the others are like desktop systems that are all disintegrated right now. And, which is not scalable for us to move as an organization. We need the technology to be able to expand. And the challenge has been, yes, we know that there is FOSS available, right? The free software, open source software, but then we don't have the technical ability or resources to explore that. How do we exploit that FOSS that is available, right? For example, I'll tell you, we were trying to build a marketplace so Drishti is in our core business is to provide livelihood in rural India, focusing mainly on men. So we create women entrepreneurs, we create micro enterprise groups, we help them in producing stuff, also help them with market linkage. So for the market linkage, we wanted a marketplace and look for any available open source software. One of the things that kind of fit our requirement was not commerce, which is again open source. But we had such a tough time finding any resources, let alone free. But even if we had to pay something, I couldn't find any tech resources. And again, we were exploring WooCommerce, and then, again, it comes with a cost because we have to find somebody who would help us explore or exploit the free open source thing that is out there. So my questions are here for us as being nonprofits. Is there something that, either Nilakani Foundation can help us with? One is help us with giving us affordable tech resources, right? Which we can't compete with, the tech companies out there. So that's one thing. And other thing is, yes, if any funding just for the implementation, because that is a costly, expensive affair for us as nonprofits. So I do totally understand, and I totally agree that we should go for FOSS because there's so much of open source thing. But unfortunately, as social enterprises, we don't have that ability. And that's what I'm looking for. Sorry, I made it a little long.
No, that's okay. We'll actually come back to your question because I think there's a couple of slides which actually address, or not address, at least we'll talk about it. I don't think there's any addressing the money aspect with the technology talent. It's the reality of what we all have to face. But we'll come back to that, Girija. But we will take that up in a slide and we can talk a bit more on that. How about you, Siddharth?
Yeah, hi. Just want to confirm if I'm audible. Yeah. Okay. So no, just coming from Girija's point, right, where she was talking about building a marketplace, and that this brings up an example that we've also been struggling with. There are a couple of product ideas that we have in hand, and there's an in-house product that we've also developed. But essentially, I think one of the things that I've felt, it becomes a major challenge is the speed at which you develop with nonprofits, right? You look at all these startups coming up with new products. I think Cred is not a great example. I think they change their interface every day. But the speed at which, or the number of sprints which it takes for them to really understand user feedback and I kind of incorporate that. I think what I've observed with the social impact space is that speed is something that we struggle with, right? So with and the nature of requirements changing in our space is much faster, I feel, than the usual consumer space. So I think that's a challenge, and I've also written that as volatile requirements. That situations are suddenly changing in a week or two or in a month, but we are falling far behind. And, it takes us like 3-4 months to even finalize the requirements and bring it into like an actual sprint plan. So how to balance that, and I'm not even sure if that can be fixed through staffing alone, right? So I think that's something that's a question that I would want to maybe pull in, and maybe we can address that.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll, I don't know how much we will go in detail on that, but I do think that part of what you said and part of what Girija is talking about is something that we will kind of go through in some of the slides, and we can have a more longer conversation on that. I think we have one more person, Shahzadeh.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shahzadeh from Pukar. So actually, we have a huge amount of data with us, and we have all this data in external hard drives. But we are now planning to save all this data on the cloud just for this security of data. And actually, the problem with us is that we are unable to find platform where should we upload this data, and what should be the guideline for uploading, hosting data, and retrieval, just to ensure data privacy and security. I have been exploring shared drive for long, but I'm little confused with the limit of data on the shared drive. Somewhere it is written 4 lakh items. I mean, it is item wide, it is not for and about the size of the data. So if you can help us in that.
Yeah, we can definitely have that conversation, Shahzadeh.
Yeah.
I'll not go too much on during the webinar, but I think you might see some things that kind of click for you. We'll go over some of the resources that we have put in, but we can definitely have a separate conversation on that, because your problem is super particular, right? So
okay.
I think that's all we have. So let's we will take up quite a bit actually of whatever we had. Girija and Shahzadeh will come back to you later, and then the other person, I'm forgetting their name, that responded, and we will just take that up during the conversation in the next few slides. Okay. So this one's a little bit on kind of thinking about what we call as technology misconceptions that we see a lot of times being bandied about among nonprofits. And I just wanted to roll it up. We're not going to spend that much time, because I think for a lot of you all, I think you're already down the paths which are taking you away from this. So first one, very obvious one, of tech being the solution. And the way we see it is like tech being an enabler, but if you don't have a good idea of programs and organizations and where you are going, tech's not going to help you that much. Second one, that's been lots of times the questions from lots of smaller organizations, whether it's good for them to do tech. And the way we talk about it is more, if you have systems and processes in place, then we feel you're ready. If you don't have systems and processes, then having technology is not going to do you a whole lot more of good. You might actually be bringing in more problems of trying to deal with introducing something new when processes are not set. Again, this is kind of like a call of what the technology looks like. We would recommend start small and then build up. But as long as you have reasonable processes, you should be ready to use technology, as long as it's giving you useful benefit, whether it is helping your programs, whether it is good job aids for your entire organization. As long as it fits one of those items, then it's a good thing to have. The third point on funders being hesitant to pay for technology. I think this has been evoked quite a bit. I think we also had one of the people during the initial poll talk about this also. And the way we look at it is, this is a big topic that people always talk about. And we say, if you are asking for funding, roll technology costs in there. And what we are seeing is, and this is kind of what we recommend, is put a technology budget, clearly specify that, not just saying an overarching budget of technology. Say what your technology is going to buy for you in terms of what you are trying to do in that program. And whether that might mean to say, hey, I will be able to collect data more efficiently. I will be able to reduce paper costs and the cost of somebody having to manually transcribe that. This will allow me to do, provide certain amount of outcomes which will be quantitative in nature. And being able to list out all of those things for funders to see what that technology is buying them. A lot of times is enough for them to be convinced and for them not to ask questions back to say, hey, this is too much. When we are able to just say, when we just say technology and we want X% or X lakhs or anything like that on a program, then there's probably pushback. But if you're able to clearly make the case saying this is what it is going to do for you, for your program, then we feel that a lot of times funders are okay with that. And that's what we always recommend, not to have like, don't go ask for technology as such, but say, hey, what is this technology going to do for my program? And be able to state that very, very clearly. And then the last one, I think we've already started that conversation of custom solutions and using open source software platforms. And so from our experience, we feel that for most organizations, you should be able to use what's already been available, or customize, or take something and customize what's already been available. Very few needs should need, very few technologies should really be built perspective. We don't see so many unique problems. We don't see so many unique issues that need custom solutions to be built. And the other way to also look at it is, you can still have a platform or a solution providing you 80% of your backbone. And what it might need is, you might build a mobile app on top of it, which is very specific for a particular use case and need that you have identified, and it makes sense. But you could have the rest of your system just run on that backbone that's already tested, used by multiple organizations and things. So it's also an idea of looking at how much do you want to get into a custom built solution with all its problems that it brings. And our recommendation at Tech4Dev is, don't go in there till you've really figured out that this is the only way you can operate it. So a little bit of a model of how we think of implementing technology and how we see it should be, what we are thinking it should be done. And from all the cases that we have worked with, is start first and foremost at your organization and program strategy. If you've got that all figured out, use that to drive a tech strategy, which is based on goal identification, needs assessment, and a full requirements. And this is where I think we also see a lot of times what happens is we see a lot of requirements being done verbally through email, not well documented. And there's a lot of mismatch after 3 months later when the vendors have started actually doing stuff. And there is like a back and forth between the NGOs and vendors and saying, oh, this is not happening, this is not. And then they say, oh, we never understood this need. So a lot of times what our big recommendation is, once you've got to the point where you have a needs assessment, create this full-fledged requirement document, which really helps you tell, oh, this is what I absolutely need. And then the second part to that is, this requirement document absolutely needs to look at that point, a user, and say, how is my user going to use this technology, and think through that. Because if you don't have that also in that first plan, what you're going to do is you're going to build the technology 3 or 4 months down the road, you're going to go through this whole process of I need to push it to users, and you will get into another circle where it doesn't work for the users. So at the second stage itself, we recommend get a full-fledged idea of like, how does the user going to interact? And that user could be multiple different people. It could be people in your organization. It could be your frontline workers, it could be management, it could be also the actual people who the NGOs actually running the programs for. And so depending on who that is or how they're going to interact, you have to figure out their needs well. And if you have those set up done, then is what I would say the next one is to figure out a tech solution. And this is where I think the biggest help would be to leverage community resources. Do your research, look and find, see if somebody's already built something close enough, see where you can get there, see how much of your needs will be met. And to us, our thinking will be, if you can meet around 80%, that's probably, you're already at a reasonable first start. And then you look at community resources, talk to people, see if there are things that you might have overlooked, to see if there are other possible solutions, and kind of figure out, can you get to this point where you don't have to build something? And that would be a big thing to do at that point, because then you are setting yourself up to basically be able to experiment much quicker. Because if you're using a platform that exists, and if you are able to find people who can implement on that platform, you can now push together something much quicker, which again helps for you, especially if everything's not perfectly known, which is always the case. Your requirements are known, but maybe it's at 80%. So it allows you to then start small and start quick. And that would be the biggest things of getting to the point where you are not custom building. And then the next one that I had in here, which was the scale thinking, is look again for solutions that can scale, but again, think about starting small. So one of the things that is nice things about most open source or SaaS platforms is they are set up for scale. Custom builds, unless very well specified, and unless the developers really are working together in a very concerted manner, typically are not set up for scale. And that's one of the things. And also our requirements will also probably change, because a lot of times what we will say is, oh, we want to set up the system today for 100 users. Only 100 people will get on our system. In 2 years, everything's working well. And then we are like, oh, we're going to take the system and we're going to push it to 1,000 users. And then we will see all the problems crop up because it was never meant for that scale. Again, this can again happen with platforms, but the likelihood of that is going to be a lot lesser too. A lot easier to scale when you already have a system that's working for multiple organizations and at much more scale. So the next other big thing that we talk about before you get to the point where you're fully implementing is to think about what will it take to have all my training, how do I support the people who are going to use this, and enough documentation, and think through that. So building software is not just the building software part, but it's going to be also about the sustaining part. How are we going to help train our users to use the system? That's one part of it. The second part of it is, again, on the software end, make sure it is well documented, make sure you have your code, make sure that you can use that if, let's say, the developer's gone, which consistently happens that we have seen where lots of times we use interns, lots of times we use people with 2 or 3 developers, and then we don't have, we can't go back to them. And then lots of times we have seen cases where we don't even have source code. Or if we have source code, we don't know how to see what is that, what do the things even do. And then use all of these to plan for iteration, where you can iterate based on what you have seen and put that into you and plan for that for your budgets. So this again leads back to the whole discussion about platforms. We just talked about it a little bit. I'll go a little bit more in detail, and some of the considerations that you want to think about before you would ever consider building your own custom thing. And some of those things are the scale of what you want to build, what kind of maturity as an organization, and as maturity of the actual program you're trying to develop is. The opportunity cost is basically the cost of, like, do I want something to run in 2 months? In which case, most developers won't be able to provide you that. While if you get on a platform and you customize it, you will not get 100% of your needs met, but you can get 70, 80% of your needs met and run a pilot to see if this is going to actually work. The other big thing is, do you have technology capacity on your end? If you're going to work with a vendor, how convinced are you that whatever they're going to provide is going to be of good quality that you can take up and sustain over time? So again, things for us all to think about when we think about this in terms of, do I make a custom build? And from all of these, typically what we see is tech capacity is quite difficult for a lot of NGOs. Lots of times we want things quick. We are not fully set on our requirements. So we have changes, which are all very difficult when you go towards a custom built solution. And so for a lot of these reasons, why we typically say, look at platforms that are available. And here there's a multiple selection of platforms that are here. And actually the next slide would be a better slide to go about, where you can see different platforms. Some of it are from our tool set, but a lot of it are either open source or can be SaaS platforms. The idea is figure out what your needs and requirements are and find a platform that will give you close to what you need. And that's probably a better bet for you to get started and run through and figure out, is this going to work before you go into a long drawn out development effort. So here, we can pass the slides on after the end of the webinar. We'll pass it through Sahana. And this has links to all the things that are posted here, so you can take a look at it. But the idea here was more in terms of exposure to say, there are a lot of platforms which allow for doing a lot of the things that we all are usually looking for doing in terms of software building. And the idea is, can you use these platforms instead of trying to build your own? So I'll actually take a minute here, because I think there were a few questions in the surveys we had sent out in terms of platforms and some challenges and things like that. And we can also talk about that. We can also talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I think, Girija, you were talking about on, if we go open source, how do we look for support? How do we get people to implement it? And how do we get there? So just to come back to your question, while others can also raise hands and we can take up those questions. So the way we see it is, typically even with open source, there are a lot of software that gets developed, but doesn't mean it gets used considerably. And so that's one of the things that also I would think about and caution against. And one of the things that is helpful is to talk to a few different people who are able to provide that technology knowledge. So for example, you are wanting something in data collection, and let's say you're able to do a full requirements document of what you need. You could ping us. And I'll also talk about a few other community resources that you could ping based on your requirement set, and kind of try to figure out, hey, what would be a good advice for me to see? And that kind of also eliminates all those first choices that if you Google, you might find, but you may never find users for that open source platform. It may not be maintained and there's not people really developing on it. So that to me would be the biggest thing that I can recommend is, you know, almost like the TV show Call a Friend or something, is like talk to your peers here. Feel free to ping us. There's also a few other groups that I will put together just in a slide after and something that can help think about what would be the more commonly used platforms and try to go towards those alternatives. Any other questions from anybody else on platforms and anything up to now? Okay. Okay, I'll then move forward. So we
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Vinod. there was another part to my question as well about the funding. Hello?
Sorry, go.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you hear me? Did you hear me?
I couldn't hear the first part very well.
Okay. I said there was another second part to my question about the funding that we could get for implementation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
I was just about going to say, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I was going to say the funding for implementations, right? So again, this is the same thing that we kind of talked about is if you are talking about having the funding as part of the program, I would recommend that that is budgeted right there. And think through also at that point of time, what it would take for you to set up a system. If you are saying, I need to do field surveys. So you would be at that point of time requiring some form of a data collection system and some form of data storage and a data analysis, right? So theoretically, it would be really possible for you to just go look at it at that point and then say, hey, I will need something like this, some amount of implementation support, and that's what I should budget for when I go ask a funders to say, fund my program for this, and basically clearly say that this is what it's going for. As far as like the cheapness of implementation or anything, that I would probably say, like, am I going to get resources that are cheap? Our thinking primarily is you can, but you may not get what you want. You're probably going to get what you pay for. Tech resources are definitely not cheap.
No, my meaning was not cheap in the sense I would get good resources, but at affordable. When I say affordable, it's not that the resource I'm getting will be paid less. I'm thinking of, like, say some tech company doing it as a CSR activity for us and giving giving their resources, tech experts on as a CSR thing instead of funding maybe, or that is what I meant by affordable and not cheap. You mean the payment wise. And the other part of the funding, yes, we do know what our requirements are, but is that something here the advisors at Aspire or the Nilakani foundations, will they help us get the funding if our requirements are clear?
If I could interject. Yeah, so I think this might be a conversation that you could have with the Aspire team, because they are putting together a community of support. So I think we can park this from this
Great.
conversation.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Yeah.
I'll take up one point of yours, which you just mentioned, Girija, though. That was on CSR efforts and software development, which is pro bono or done for very little money. This is actually one of probably my favorite pet topics, because I deal with the issues that a lot of times comes with this. And the way I look at it is, it's great. It's a great CSR service, and it probably can help with your short-term need. But there are a lot of things that you will have to consider. I'm not saying there is a straight answer, whether it's a yes or a no. But a lot of times we don't consider what that means. Typically, when it's a CSR project, you have people donating their time. Takes a long time. Is it going to fit in with your timelines? Are your requirements for a pilot or for continued program involvement over multiple years? Because if that's going to be, they are going to develop it and you need somebody to sustain it. And that's not going to happen from the CSR end, because the CSR, it's going to be changing. People in the CSR change. So somebody could develop it in their pet software framework, and then you're stuck with it. So a lot of times what happens is there's a disconnect between what we want versus what something developed through a CSR can help. I think as long as you are in sync with what you are getting and you are okay with this is the framework in what I am getting this software, it's fine. But I think you do have to think through what is it that you want. If you say, I want a software that's going to set up my NGO for the next 3 to 5 years, then that's not going to be a great endeavor through a CSL. So again, you have to balance out the pros and cons of doing it. So I won't go too much over this slide, just to give people an idea, like there are a lot of software that are available that can help you set up either at very reasonable cost or free from, like, for example, Microsoft, AWS, Amazon Web Services, and Google. You can get free credits that allows you to run your servers, allows you to run, if you're running AI, ML, if you're running databases, data warehouses, you can get up to X amount of dollars every year for being able to do that, which can again help funnel some of your technology implementation money and use that for better implementations. So again, some things to just think about on your ends on what's already available. Either it's credits or it could be free. So something that could be used. So kind of go over very quickly with some of leveraging community and existing resources. As always, talk to us. These are some of our partners that we've worked with. They work consistently with the social sector, and so they know the challenges of working with the social sectors, and you can talk to them and leverage their experience out of it. There's a couple of WhatsApp groups which allow for IT support. You can go ask questions, the CTO for nonprofits, where you can ping and say, hey, I'm trying to develop this. What are resources that can help me? There's also other forums that are available. Tech4Good Labs has a T4G discourse forum that you can go and people can help. Digital Public Goods Alliance is open source software that are being given the public goods stamp. That kind of, again, could be a first choice for you to check if you're thinking, oh, I need something, some software to do a particular need or requirement. And again, also the other thing would be to also use the peer group in this current webinar, this webinar group, and see if people have done something similar before and their learnings and pros and cons of going with what they have done before. So that would be the recommendation, is learn as much as you can from the community resources before you go forward with doing more things. Sorry about that. So a little bit about vendors, vendor management, and how we kind of look at it, and what we see also as like how the expectations and responsibilities are kind of balanced across between NGOs and vendors. And this kind of helps when you're able to think through a lot of these things. It helps also in terms of being able to set expectations for your vendors and being able to get the maximal output so that there is a good stream of communication between the NGO and the vendor. On the NGO side, we look at some of these big items that NGO should really take responsibility and ownership over, is coming up with clear set of requirements, user flows. Having that really helps vendors to basically come in, evaluate costs, evaluate their timelines, and provides them very good understanding of what is it that they're developing. And so from those are very important. The other thing that we also recommend for NGOs to have is to have a certain amount of selection criteria. And this is something, again, would be to understand, how do I select my vendors? And again, you might have past vendors, but important to tell what you are embarking into and seeing if these are the people you want to develop for something that you might be developing new. So think through that, leverage again community resources to see what all should you be thinking about, what all should be the criteria that you're looking for your particular requirements and technology that you're developing. Understand also that any software technology introduction, the software development is just part of the process. We have to deal with change, and change management becomes very important. And a lot of times it's looked at as like, oh, we'll do this and we'll introduce it. We'll have a a screen share, and we'll do one, everybody comes in, 1 hour session, and then we're ready to use the software. A lot of times it doesn't happen. You need user buy-in. That happens over a much longer period. Lots of times we would recommend pilot with 2 or 3 groups, get user feedback, address their feedback, and that way you can develop a product that users are going to be readily more wanting to do it. And the other big thing is make sure that you address what they would benefit out of, because that's important. If people don't see a benefit, then over time that software is not going to get used. And again, as part of the process, make sure you are monitoring performance of the vendor, have weekly calls, make sure things are addressed sooner than later. And as far as on the vendor side, what your expectation should be is that vendors completely manage delivery of whatever they are developing. Make sure their code is well developed, versioned, they are using some form of software repositories that we as NGOs should have access to. Again, easy enough to see if they are documenting code. And again, start this early enough in the process. It shouldn't be that code is documented after software is delivered, after user acceptance testing is done. Also expect your vendors to do automated testing of their software products. So you are not the first people testing the product. This we see a lot because a lot of times we want products to be fast and pushed out very fast. And what usually suffers is documentation and testing. And we end up with a software that is buggy, introduced to users, users hate the software, and then we are now back to square one. The other thing that we should also probably insist a lot of times in developments is think through what users and user flows need and develop some form of user prototypes. It doesn't need to be fully built out, doesn't need to be 100%, but at least addressing the major user flows and get input back from users. This kind of alleviates a lot of change management, and users can see that they are being considered in the process, that it makes introducing change a lot easier. Not going to go too much into detail on data, but just a couple of finishing slides, and then we can take up questions. Think through data privacy, not at the end. Think through starting from the start. Think through what you need to collect, and if you need to collect certain things. There's always this whole need for us to collect data. Figure out, are you going to actually use it? Now we have, I think, at least personally, I have seen an organization collecting Aadhaar data. Is it used anywhere? No. Somebody had this idea, oh, we could use this as a unique identifier into our systems. Did they need it? No. Again, you are now putting the NGO in the responsibility of holding on to Aadhaar data. And now we have to think about the privacy of the data and also now the security of the data to a lot more extent than if we didn't have that. So again, think through from the start itself of what you are trying to achieve and start from privacy and security being your guidelines for what you are going to collect, use, and output data. The other big thing is, as we talk about data, this is becoming more and more of what funders want, and in terms of evidence-driven programs, where you are able to prove evidence through your data. And this kind of, again, comes back to some of the funding questions that we have had. If you are able to, again, connect technology towards helping the organization in multiple different ways, towards having evidence-driven programs, which are data-driven, which will allow you to basically prove failures or success of interventions. It makes it a lot easier for also funders to see, okay, this is what I'm supporting through technology for these in this particular lens of it driving my outcomes to tell if these interventions are going to work. So some things to think about where you start embedding that culture of saying data is important. We collect data for the purpose of informing what we do and how well we are doing it. And this one's literally the last slide. Again, just to reinforce one of the key things that I totally believe in is to start again with the user and then build. Think through, if you are developing a technology in mind, how will it benefit the user that you're developing towards? Make sure that you are getting feedback. Make sure you're engaging with them. Make sure you get feedback a lot earlier and allocate time for training. And it is very, very rare for any software introduction to not be iterated on. You are going to have iterations, so iterate with your users through. You can see us at our website. There should be a contact form. If you have questions that you want to take up as outside of these discussions, feel free to contact us there. And we should have one of us take up the calls, depending on what your questions are about. So I'll open up the floor for questions, and then we can talk through.
While the questions come in, if there's a way you all could also say, how do they reach out to you and for what? What are the different kinds of offerings Tech4Dev provides? But probably wait for a little bit more for people to ask questions.
So, you want to take that up?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. So we run quite a few platforms. So we run Glyphic, Avni, starting with the development data platform. And we also work with quite a few other open source projects like Kobo Toolbox, Primero. We run a fractional CXO program where we can work with the organization, where we'll place a senior technology person like Vinod or myself or Erica for either quarter time or half time for a period of 3 to 9 months. And that we are still figuring out what a really good time frame is to help you sort out through some of your tech strategy decisions, some of your technology decisions, and in some cases even help you implement technology. Do we have anything? Yeah. So those are our two main initiatives from working with NGOs closely. What we also do is every quarter we have these sprints where we invite a bunch of NGOs to come hang out with us, work on some of the problems, more specifically with some of our platforms, but we try to get quite a few ecosystem players together. Starting this year, and we think this year is going to happen in the August-September timeframe. We are going to have a tech gathering for NGOs and the social sector. So anyone and everyone connected with tech and the social sector is more than invited. We'll have a bunch of talks, try to upskill people, etc. And we always do a lot of webinars. The minute we run into an NGO who's doing some interesting work, the first thing we ask them is, hey, are you willing to share your work? Are you willing to talk about it? And we try to publish this on LinkedIn. And we've also got a few mailing lists that we publish on. But as I said in the beginning, right, like, I think we are super open. We are super approachable. We try to do a lot of stuff for free and pro bono. And in case we even think of charging you, right, we'll tell you like 1 or 2 weeks before we even consider charging you, right? So it's not that we'll work with you and then stick you with a bill. I mean, to a large extent, we are here for you. We are here to help you out, and we are here with you. So, and we've got information on our website. You can send us email either to our personal email addresses or info@projecttech4dev.org.
Yeah, and we have, I think we have somebody from Intersection. We have people from our community who have worked with Tech4Dev and who have used the fractional CXO services. 2 of our partners actually share a CXO. It also helps that, you don't have to take the heavy lifting in the very beginning, but this person then helps you set up the team, understand the requirements, and also given their expertise of understanding the social sector space itself, civil society organizations, they're a tremendous resource on also what not to do, which is one of the feedbacks that we've got from a lot of people, that they've said that this was not the direction we only realized this is not the direction to take after we had this conversation with them. Yeah. So if there are no other questions, then I think in these cases, it does take some time for people to digest and kind of understand, how do we process this. So we will share a recording of this. I think Vinod said he'll share the deck as well, and we'll send it to all of you with the contact details of the team. And in case of, very specific, because these questions also become very specific, contextual to your organization, I think then you can have these conversations directly with the Tech4Dev team.
Thanks,
All
Sahana.
right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lobo. Thanks, Erica, Yali, Vinod, all of you for organizing this, and we appreciate your time. And thanks to all of you who spent an hour with us. We deeply appreciate it. Have a good
Ciao.
evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.